This is OL Nation. Welcome Lawrencians across generations around the globe. At OL Nation, our mission is thought leadership, knowledge sharing, networking, mentorship, and more. I'm your program host, Rohan Shetty, Vindhya, 1986. This evening, we journey into science. And now we have Bina Beliappa, OLA President, on the show to say a few words. Welcome, Bina.
Thank you, Rohan. Hi, everyone. Last month, we finally celebrated founders on the campus after a break of 2 years. A big salute to the headmaster and all the staff and students as they put together a very impressive parade, beating retreat, along with the PT display, variety entertainment, equestrian show, all within a matter of 3 weeks. In spite of short notice with founders' dates, we had a reasonably good turnout of Old Lawrencians, some with milestone reunions, and many for just the joy of finally being able to go on to the campus. For the OLA, it was an eventful founders, as we had our first hybrid AGM on the 5th of September on the campus with both physical presence and global online presence. We had a keenly contested online vice presidential election, 900 plus global votes. We also facilitated on-the-spot ballot for those who missed out, after which the elections was ratified at the AGM. The last committee had the mission of Global Connect, which was successfully achieved through the 40 plus WhatsApp groups across the globe. The present committee will continue in similar lines with an added difference of community outreach through which we will give back to the school and the many people who need our help. The OLA conducted a very well-received learning and development program for students and parents with the coordination of the school management. This was spearheaded by the OL Nation team. We do plan to do very many more interactive sessions for the school. Thank you to all of you at OL Nation for the effort you put in to put these events together. Thank you once again and enjoy the session. Over to you, Rohan.
Thank you, Bina. Always good to have you here. Thank you. And now we have the headmaster, Mr. K. Prabhakaran. Welcome, Mr. Prabhakaran. Welcome to our program.
Good evening, OL community. Good evening, Mr. Rohan Shetty and the OL team. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to give a feedback. First of all, I thank all the OL's parents and students who were here last month attending Founders. And Founders, this time it was in September 6th, and this was specifically because of the batch, the present batch, which will be living, batch of 2022 will be completing their examination in March, April, because the CBSE cycle is also coming back to normal. So they will miss out if we schedule it in May as usual. So we decided to have it in September so that this batch will get that Founders celebrations, and it went on well. There are about 3,500 people attended, and we had almost all activities. Most of the outdoor activities went on well, even though the weather conditions were highly unpredictable, and also a large number of OL delegates, OLs were also there. The march past went on well. Now, this year, that is after this year, 2023, we are reverting back to normal, either third week or second week. May will be the Founders, and we have not finalized the date because we are still waiting for the CBSE examination date sheet. Once the date sheet is published, then we will finalize it, but definitely it will be in the month of May with the present batch, which will be 2023 batch. And knowledge sharing facility, the knowledge sharing program, which was conducted by OLs, went on very well. And immediately after Founders, we had examinations. We could follow up after the exam. We had a small Diwali break. Now we are all back. And we will continue that journey of knowledge sharing, where the collective wisdom of OL community can definitely will be tapped for the for the growth of for the growth and education of existing students. That we will work out. I'll discuss with Rohan, and it can be a regular process. And we are very open and very happy to take that to the next level on a regular basis. Then this year, admission process are still going on. We have got a very good response, and the assessment, aptitude assessment for the next academic year is going to be in 6th of November. And the new batch, this batch will move in April. The new batch will come in April. So it is going on. And sports and games, immediately after coming back, we have given plenty of opportunity for children to have their sports and games. In fact, more than 360 students have taken part in district, state, and IPSC level competitions representing the school. Right now, when I'm speaking to you, our athletics team, boys and girls, is going to represent the Lawrence School in PPS Nava IPSC athletics tournament, and our badminton team is in Pune, again national level IPSC team taking part. So we are going ahead, and first of all, back to normal schedule, and we are also having an equestrian program also next 2 days. So it's absolutely back to normal. Now, surprisingly, now the weather condition is changing. This time seems to be an early winter. Already the mist, fog, and winter has already set in. And I think what I can make out is the climate change is a reality now. As a teacher, geography and environment teacher, I used to teach this in the class, but now it's a reality. The cycle of winter is early setting in. Let's see. We have to find a way to see how we can sail through even with this changing weather conditions. And we are also making some changes. Our band is very prestigious. We are going ahead with it, and we are adding girls in brass band and bugle band. Otherwise, girls only go for the pipe band. But from this year onwards, next year when we come for founders, definitely girls also will be there in bugle and brass band team. So that is something. And there are a lot of other changes. We are trying to improve the number of activities and increase the number of sporting representation. It's going on well. And also, the term is going to end first week of December for winter vacation, 4th of December. And after that, it's a winter break. And we'll be calling the board examination students a bit early. Of course, fundamentally, we are an academic institution. We have to focus on academic performance as well. So we are focusing on giving that academic rigor after a strenuous representation in sports, games, founders, etc. So we are just working on it. That's all from my side. All the best for your team. This journey in science, I'm also waiting to see and hear those collective wisdom which we can get from the experienced and knowledgeable people from our community. Thank you. Thank you once again, Rohan, for giving me an opportunity to give brief feedback. All the best to your team and for the program. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Always great to have you on our program. We look forward to working with the school in the months to come. And now we have KALPANA KUTTAIAH, Pankaj 1980, your host for the session. Welcome, Kalpana.
Thank you, Rohan, and hello, everyone. We have for you in this session 3 remarkable scientists. In our preparation for this session, I was blown away by the narration of their professional journeys, and I'm excited for all of you to know about it as well. Our OL Nation team is very grateful to them for willing to be on the show with us, and we hope you enjoy the conversations as well. To get us started on this session titled Journeys in Science, I'm very happy to introduce Mahesh Kumar, Paul Matthew, and SIDDHARTH Balachandran. Dr. Mahesh Kumar, Arvali, 1979, studied biochemistry before moving to the United States for his advanced studies. He completed a master's and a doctorate in microbiology through a Sea Grant Fellowship. After his doctorate, began his career in research and development work on vaccines for birds. Focused on animal health, he has worked for leading pharmaceutical companies that include Bayer and Pfizer. Notable vaccines developed by Mahesh include bird flu, swine flu, salmonella, E. coli, and most recently, COVID-19. He's currently a senior vice president for Zoetis, a Pfizer spin-off responsible for the research and development of vaccines for all animals. Welcome, Mahesh. talking about scientific journeys. Do you want to give us a little bit of insight into yours?
Thank you, Kalpana, and welcome to the OL Nation. And I'm very excited to be here and talk about my journey in science. So I think if you talk to anybody of my classmates, they probably wonder, why am I sitting here? And I would say I probably consider myself an accidental scientist. I think like most people, we started our journey as trying to go to medical school and failing which we ended up going into some other form of science. Luckily for me, I found my path in the microbiology area and had great guideposts or mentors along the way that helped me get to where I am. So I'm happy to say that I've been fortunate to work with so many different species and working with so many different diseases. And I hope to share more of that journey with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mahesh. And now let me introduce to you all Dr. Paul Matthew, Vindhya, 1981. He's a medical oncologist specializing in clinical care of prostate, kidney, bladder, and testis cancer. His principal research interest is to define mechanisms of disease progression for prostate cancer and bone metastasis, and to design novel therapeutic approaches towards the control of lethal dimensions of the illness. After finishing school at Lovedale, Paul went to medical school at the University of Lagos in Nigeria, and he did his internal medicine and residency at Cook County Hospital in Chicago, and a fellowship in hematology oncology at Mayo Clinic, Rochester. Paul's interest in fundamental research was sparked at Mayo Clinic, and this influenced his career trajectory at MD Anderson and now at Tufts Medical Center. Welcome, Paul, and happy to have you in OL Nation. And please, can you tell us what influenced all that you studied in this fascinating career?
Thank you so much, Kalpana, for that warm introduction. And thanks to OL Nation for this great opportunity to speak to all of you about my journey in science. As Mahesh alluded, I had some parallel trajectories in the sense that I came to science late. I really was focused on becoming a doctor and acquiring, whatever technical competence goes along with being a doctor. That was my essential focus. I remember interviewing at Mayo and them asking me if I'd done any research in my residency years, and I said no. And they asked me, do you plan to do any research? And I said, heck no, because I'm so busy learning the fundamentals of my craft. I have so much more to learn. And nowadays, you'd probably flunk the interview if you said something like that. But for some reason, they were impressed and decided to take me on. And then later on in my fellowship, I decided to spend a year in the laboratory of Spaniard, Carlos Paya, who was actually an infectious disease doctor, not an oncologist. And that's where I sort of fell in love with the process of laboratory-based science. I had some introduction to clinical research, but laboratory-based science was something altogether different, something very sort of magical and full of promise to discover something entirely new, which hadn't been discovered before. I think that's what captivated me, even though it was an arduous and painstaking process. I just love the whole aspect of it. And that's where I think it all started. And I think it's the memory of that has persisted till now and defined my career trajectory up until this day.
Thank you, Paul. I know in our discussions, more of what you've done will be in conversation. So let's look forward to that. And now let me introduce Dr. SIDDHARTH Balachandran, Arvali, 1991. He obtained his Bachelor of Science in Chemistry from Angelo State University in West Texas. During this time, he developed a strong interest in molecular biology and specifically in the biology of viruses. He then went on to get his PhD in immunology in viral pathogenesis at Emory University here in Atlanta. Following that, with a postdoctoral training at the University of Miami, he started his independent research career at the Fox Chase Cancer Center in 2007, where he currently works as a professor. He continues to work on viruses and is now seeking to use them to improve cancer immunotherapies. Welcome, SIDDHARTH. I know you have lots of interesting stories to say that led you to this career path, so please do share some more with us.
Sure. Thanks, Kalpana. Thanks for that lovely intro. Hello, everybody. So yeah, I've always been interested in science for as long as I can remember, but my career as such got off mainly to a series of inauspicious starts. And so, you know, one good example is when I was in Lawrence, I was one of 2 Lawrentians that were sort of corralled to go take the IIT entrance exam. So we were, you know, clad in our ties and blazers and everything, and packed into the Baraga Vandi, the school bus, and shipped off to Coimbatore. And that was a harrowing experience because, you know, just looking at these, at the questions on that entrance exam was something that we'd never encountered before. And I think I scored 0 in most of those sections. And so that was basically the story of my early days in Lawrence, and the transition from there into an independent career. So, you know, needless to say, I wasn't able to get into any of the, at least certainly on a merit-based quota system, into any of the colleges in Tamil Nadu in those days. And so I came to the US, and I developed a strong interest in geology, and this was not really well thought out. It was something that I had from my Lawrence days. But what really, there were 2 events that really sparked my interest in molecular biology. And the first of these was that I took a course in genetics in my junior year, in the summer of that year. And that was just a revelation. It was just incredible. And I quickly pivoted from chemistry to biology. So that was one event. And the second was maybe later that year, or the early part of 1994, the movie Outbreak was released. And so this is about, you know, hunting new forms of virus and that kind of stuff. And I was immediately hooked. I said, okay, this is what I want to do, is study viral pathogenesis. And so I got right into that. And this was before the internet. So, you know, I bought myself an electronic typewriter from Sears and sent off applications to a bunch of PhD programs. And I got into a bunch of the ones that I'd applied to. And I selected Emory because that's where the CDC is in Atlanta. It's right by the Emory campus. And I joined the PhD program there. But before that, I actually returned the computer back to Sears because I didn't have very much money in those days. Then one thing led to another. And here I am now, still doing viral pathogenesis and enjoying myself very much.
That's fascinating. Thank you very much, Siddharth. I've always believed that bad beginnings have good endings. So here you are having a very successful career. And so do tell, I mean, the 3 of y'all have achieved remarkable success in each of your scientific careers. So can you please help us, the rest of us who are not in your field, understand what really science is all about, the mystery behind it, and what y'all enjoy about working within it? I'll let you get us started, Siddharth.
Yeah, sure. So, so science is actually a very simple thing. It's a process. It is a tool that we use to understand the world we live in. And I use the word process because it has steps. And these steps are reasonably well characterized. And the first of these is observation. So the scientific process itself starts with an observation, which is some phenomenon that you want to seek an explanation for. Okay, so for example, you know, a bunch of people have all taken ill at the same time in some part of a city, let's say. So that's the observation. And so what could be plausible explanations for these? And so this is the second stage of science, which is where you come up with potential explanations. And that's really the fun part of science. So this is called hypothesis generation. But it's nothing more, that's just a fancy way of saying calculated guesswork. And so in this example, you know, it could be maybe demonic forces at work that have felled these people all at the same time, or it could be some sort of, you know, cloud of gas from some nearby marsh, or it could be contaminated food or water. And so these would be your educated guesses, your hypotheses. And now this is really where science begins to separate itself from other forms of inquiry. And that is that in order for you to show whether one or more of these hypotheses may be the real explanation for that phenomenon, you will have to engage in experimentation. So you will have to provide experimental or empirical proof. And so that's really what sets science apart. So, so in this example, by the way, this is something that happened in the mid 1800s in London. There was an outbreak of cholera in a part of London, and a chap by the name of John Snow, he was a practicing medical doctor, sought to explain why that might be happening. And his hypothesis was that it was contaminated water. And so he collected data points for where these cholera cases were, and he overlaid them on a map of London. And he found that they all clustered in one particular part of town. And then, so to test his hypothesis, he then overlaid over that map public sources of water. So in this case, those would be probably water fountains or something like that. And found that there was one particular water fountain that was right in the center of this sort of local outbreak of cholera. And this is where science came in. So it's basically, he had the municipality carry out the experiment of removing that particular water pump, cleaning it out, and then replacing it. And in doing so, the epidemic ended. So this is it's a very simplistic sort of example, but it, I think, encapsulates really nicely what the scientific process is all about. And there's essentially two things that I want to say about this. One is that if it is not empirically testable, then it's not science. So things like demonic forces and all, while they may be potential explanations for why something is happening, it just doesn't fall into the domain of science. So that's one point. And the second is that if the experimental data does not support the original theory or the original hypothesis, no matter how tempting or how attractive or how seductive that hypothesis is, or which big shot came up with it, or whether it was politically motivated, doesn't matter, it's out. So it is a data-driven, evidence-driven, empirically validation-based process. And that, in a nutshell, is what science is all about. Yeah, so in our discussion ahead of this particular Zoom, Paul and I were talking about some, modern day examples, and he's got some really pretty good, highlights of how the scientific process can be applied to the solution of, pressing medical needs. So, Paul, do you want to speak a little bit to that?
Sure. Siddharth, thank you. I think that's absolutely right. I think the kinds of questions that I ask in terms of science also relate to observation and generate interesting ideas about what could explain such phenomena. And then that whole process of generating a hypothesis or an educated guess and testing it with an experiment to bolster that guess in some way, the so-called empirical process. It's exactly what it's all about. So you'll recall a rather frightening time, or maybe it's still a frightening time, if you will, back in March of 2020, when the pandemic was sweeping this part of the world, certainly. And we were all, grappling with a brand new virus that we had never sort of experienced before, didn't really know how to protect ourselves from, or even how to manage our patients who were coming in the droves and dying in our ICUs. And what was clear was that there were patients, symptoms were that of, fairly mild symptoms to start, usually cough and maybe fever, sore throat, and then maybe even a course of improvement, followed by a very drastic and dramatic deterioration in which the lungs filled up with inflammation and fluid, and patients quickly, died unless they were in the ICU setting. And you may recall, the troubles that followed in India later with shortages of oxygen and ICU access and so forth that exacerbated this issue. At any rate, one of my students was giving a talk during this time, and we were trying to understand from a oncology, hematology background, which is our blood disorders and cancer division part of medicine, what is our role to play here? And we were exploring some dimensions of this syndrome that could have parallels to other conditions. And one of those that came up in one of her slides was a very strange and rare syndrome called HLH, which stands for a tongue twister, hemophagocytic lymphohistiocytosis. Anyway, she put up this cartoon there, and on that cartoon, it became clear that there were some similarities between HLH and COVID-19. In other words, there were these deranged levels of inflammatory cytokines and very high levels of an iron storage protein called ferritin in the blood. And in this process, it was shown in the cartoon that tumor necrosis factor, which is one of those immune cytokines, was possibly involved. And I knew from that laboratory experience in Mayo Clinic that TNF could activate a second messenger called NF-kappa B. That was what I was working on then, Mayo's NF-kappa B. And that could regulate a whole host of secondary inflammation mediators like interleukin-6. So the thought immediately flew into my head based on that memory that TNF could be a master regulator of this process. And I started looking around for more evidence and started finding all sorts of things that suggested that TNF might indeed be a master regulator. So that allowed me to craft that hypothesis that TNF is the master regulator of this lethal cytokine storm. And because, of course, we use TNF antagonist therapy in control of human illnesses like rheumatoid arthritis or Crohn's disease, for example, it was clear that these drugs were available and could be deployed in this context. So I started looking around for an opportunity to test this idea in a clinical trial, and eventually, after going through multiple companies and so forth, managed to get a trial funded by an offshoot of the National Institute of Health to run at Tufts. And the long story short is that a single dose of infliximab in a very ill group of patients who were hospitalized on high-flow oxygen or indeed on ventilator support could result in very high rates of recovery. Essentially, 15 out of 18 patients who were very ill and had a lot of comorbidities recovered to room air, and most of them survived. And what I also was able to demonstrate was that inflammatory cytokines such as CXCL9 and CXCL10, the names don't matter so much to you, but these were known to be regulated by tumor necrosis factor and IL-6 as well. These all came crashing down within 48 hours, indicating very dramatic response. And so integrating this high rates of clinical recovery and these particular patterns of cytokine response, we were able to infer that this was very likely a master regulator. We couldn't conclude that, but we could certainly offer a second sort of hypothesis that, look, we've got preliminary evidence that this is a safe and effective tool to use in this very serious condition. These inflammatory cytokines that are deeply implicated in serious illness are rapidly controlled. We think a larger study, a definitive phase 3 study should be done. In addition, we could also perceive through looking through the granularity of our data that TNF was possibly, and also from the prior literature in the field, stretching back over 2 decades in inflammatory illnesses in the lung, that TNF was probably setting up a positive feedback loop where it would generate, or together with interferon gamma, these 2 cytokines called CXCL9 and CXCL10, and these will attract more inflammatory cells back to the lung from the blood circulation, like lymphocytes and monocytes, and these would add up the fuel of TNF. And again, so you can imagine that circle being completed, and this sort of a positive feedback loop resulting in massive amplification of inflammation and death. So that was actually tested in a large phase 3 trial, preliminary results, which are just reported in the press, and it's awaiting review for publication, suggesting a very impressive reduction in mortality at 20 days with a single dose of infliximab. So suggesting that this original premise, original findings were validated. We'll wait to learn more on this final publication, but this gives you a sense of that cycle of that you were referring to, Siddharth, of how we start with an observation, come up with an idea, test it in the clinic or the laboratory, whatever it may be, analyze the data, make certain inferences, and then perhaps propose another hypothesis. This I think completes that loop.
I was going to add that, I was going to say, Kalpana, that certainly from my standpoint, the vaccine standpoint, similar things happen as well, right? Think about in 1700s, right? Edward Jenner was actually a zoologist initially. He was really very observant. He did a lot of work on birds. He had a seminal paper on cuckoos and then migratory birds. But anyway, so when he noticed that the smallpox, when smallpox was rampant at the time, these people were vaccinated at the time with smallpox itself. So you can imagine when you're giving the smallpox pustule material to other people, some of them survived, others got sick. What he found was there's these milkmaids, you probably all know the story, and the milkmaids did not have these smallpox lesions, even though they were. So he took some of that material from the milkmaid and gave it to an 8-year-old boy, and then he basically gave him the real bug, and he was protected. So it was one of the first experiments of an observation, and then determining, hey, can we protect them by doing an experiment and then seeing the result. This empirical type of data, we can't do these days. You can't pull somebody in, give them a vaccine, give them the challenge material right away. This is why it takes so long. Luckily, in my field, I can do these studies directly in host animals and get results sooner than later. So these kinds of things are very, very important as far as having an observation and trying to connect the dots to get to a point where we can then say, okay, would this work? Testing that out, and then voila, if it works, you see success.
Thanks, Mahesh. So what does this all mean for you all on a daily basis? I mean, how do you all spend a day in the lab, or, what's your work process like every day? Paul,
well,
let me start with you. Okay, Mahesh, go ahead. Go ahead, Mahesh.
Okay. Well, I was going to say that if you think about what I do, which is essentially trying to come up with vaccines for new diseases, and one would think that we've solved all the problems, but actually, as long as you're in my job, you'll never be out of one, because there'll be new disease coming frequently, right? So when you think you solved one, a new one will pop up. And there are many factors for that. More than 70% of new and emerging diseases are vector-borne and are basically zoonotic in nature, meaning there's an animal origin then that come and infect humans. And as you saw with COVID, but you can talk about any number of ones, bats especially, what we talked earlier about with SIDDHARTH, about how they're uniquely set up to be a good reservoir for any bug you can imagine. So when you go looking for crazy things in bat caves, you end up bringing them back home. That's one piece of it. The other one is, of course, you look at the climate change and global warming, and these vectors, insects and mosquitoes that are in certain regions move up to the colder regions, and then people who have never seen these bugs, in the insects who harbor these viruses, end up getting disease that they were not accustomed to. And you have a naive population of people, they get immediately affected, and it can become pretty much an epidemic, and sometimes a global epidemic becomes a pandemic. So for me, the thing is surveillance, looking to see what new diseases are emerging, and then immediately trying to figure out how I can start looking to make a treatment or a vaccine. In my case, we can look into those kinds of things. So in my life, almost on a daily basis, we sit down, we discuss about different things that are popping up and try to figure out how best to create a vaccine. And that's kind of how my day goes.
Thank you. Paul or SIDDHARTH, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I can go. Paul. So so I run a lab that has about between 5 and 10 people. So it's a basic science research laboratory. I'm in a .edu, so this is it's a non-profit setup. It's an academic institution. And I'm basically free to do any kind of science that I want, as long as I'm funded for it. And so typically to run a lab like mine costs about $1 million a year. That's our budget, including salaries and everything else. But most of that expense is for the experimentation that we need to do to validate our hypotheses. So we work on two major areas. One of them is viral pathogenesis, and particularly influenza viruses. And how these viruses cause lung damage, how they cause lung injury, and why that happens, and what are ways in which we can intervene and prevent that as a possible, therapeutic modality. So we've actually discovered a process of cell death that is triggered by the virus in an infected lung. And what's remarkable is that we found that the death of the cell that has been infected is really what drives injury and disease. It's not the virus itself. And we'll maybe talk a little bit more about this later when we discuss bats and so on. But the virus is something that can be tolerated. I mean, we've got viruses in our guts, for example, that commensal with us, and and in our nostrils. And but some viruses cause pathogenesis and others don't. And influenza viruses are in that category of viral agents that actually cause disease. And so what we found is that mechanisms like what Paul was talking about earlier, the cytokine storm, or in our case, a form of necrotic cell death that is triggered by the virus in the infected lung, that actually is what drives disease. And so that's a discovery that we made a few years back. And because this is a host cell driven process, it is amenable to therapeutic intervention. You don't have to worry about making new antivirals, which is something that the virus can try to evade. But in this case, you can actually come up with an anti-inflammatory as a strategy to mitigate lung disease. So that's something that that's of great interest in the lab. And the second is this area of immunotherapy. I'm in a cancer center, and so ultimately, whether or not you like to do virus-based work, you're eventually pivoted around to moving into the cancer space, and it's such a huge medical burden. I don't think there's any one of us who's been unaffected by this terrible scourge. So for a long time, the primary treatment modalities for cancer have been, surgical intervention, and that's typically the, frontline standard of care if it's a solid tumor and if it's caught early. And then radiation therapy and chemotherapy. And so these have been the pillars of cancer treatment for decades. But more recently, in the last, let's say, 10, 15 years, there's a new therapeutic modality called immunotherapy, which some of you might have heard of. And so this is really revolutionizing cancer care. And so in a nutshell, what immunotherapy is simply turning on your own immune system to fight off and destroy your cancer. And it's really very promising. And there are a subset of patients who can be completely cured by immunotherapeutic modalities. But those are a minority. And there's a huge problem. And the huge problem with immunotherapy is that most patients will simply not respond to this form of treatment. So we are really actively engaged in trying to find ways to boost immunotherapy responsiveness. So in other words, try to make the tumor recognized by your own immune system as a foreign and dangerous entity, so that your own immune system is actually really, really good at fighting off and destroying cancer, far better than any chemotherapy or radiation for that matter. So, but the problem is you have to alert the immune system to the presence of this tumor. And so that's what we're getting into. And we're really borrowing from our work on viral pathogenesis, because viruses are your primary target for an immune system. So if we can mimic a virus infection in a tumor mass, so in other words, if we can find a way to have a tumor catch a cold or catch the flu, so to speak, then by doing so, you can, in some sense, fool your own immune system into fighting off the tumor, thinking that it's actually infected tissue. So this sounds like a little bit sort of, out there kind of thinking, but it works. It works. There's a whole emerging cottage industry on this.
I guess there's less side effects, and all of that is also taken care of in this kind of approach of treatment, right?
Yeah, because you're repurposing your immune system in a certain way. Now you do have side effects, because what happens now, if you combine this with immunotherapy, is that you run the risk of triggering autoimmunity maybe down the road, but more acutely, you run the risk of triggering the very cytokine storm that Paul was talking about, because an overexuberant immune response can do that kind of damage. Now, of course, if you're also a cancer patient, then probably that's less of an issue, because you want your cancer gone. And if you have to, maybe suffer for a couple of weeks through these immune-related sequelae, then so be it. It's okay. Most people are willing to take that chance. So that's where we are. And we are currently, looking into starting a clinical trial with an agent that is a virus mimetic, which is to say it's a small molecule, it's an organic compound that really mimics an influenza infection in the tumor mass. And so we are trying to combine this molecule with standard of care immunotherapy for recurrent melanoma and refractory melanoma, and potentially to expand this to other cancer types, such as most notably pancreatic, because that's something that's really taking off as some sort of an epidemic now these days in the US, certainly. And there's no real cure for it once it begins to spread. So that's kind of where we are. Now, my lab's a couple of rooms, on a daily basis. As I'd mentioned, our budget is about $1 million a year. And so my primary job is to raise this fund, these funds. And the main source of funding in the US is the National Institutes of Health. So I spent about half my working hours writing grants and trying to get our science funded. And so that's mostly my job. But the real fun part of my job is the 10 to 20% of the time that I spend talking to the folks in my lab and coming up with ideas and, new strategies, new hypotheses, and new ways to test these hypotheses. So So that's what keeps me going and makes me, jump out of bed and get to work. And it's a really exciting profession to be in.
Thanks, Siddharth. Paul, you want to add anything to how y'all might be working, how your lab functions, and how people approach work every day on a daily basis? I know you shared with us a little bit about the clinical trials piece that y'all did, but is there anything more you would like to add?
Oh, sure. I mean, my work is, of course, split between clinical work because I'm primarily a physician. Even as a scientist, I consider myself as a physician in the laboratory, thinking about how my science is applied to a solution that can be taken to the clinic. And just to jump off what Siddharth was talking about as it relates to the immune system, the previous example I gave of the infliximab clinical trial related to dampening the aberrant or the over-exuberant immune response to generate recovery from a viral illness. That was just a response to the pandemic. It's not my major focus, as you know. My major focus is on metastasis and prostate cancer. And I think the main point I would give to the audience about metastasis is that it's a non-random process. Cancers don't spread indiscriminately and grow indiscriminately. They have certain patterns that they're reasonably loyal to. An excellent example of this is prostate cancer and bone metastasis. And so that's what my lab works on. And we've, we meet every week. We have a 3-hour meeting, usually Wednesday afternoons. I have a crew of about 3 people working with me who work primarily in the laboratory. We are also funded by the NIH, as Siddharth is, and that is essential because it's very expensive to run a research lab. But these can be very exhilarating, conversations, when you find new data that could have great significance, could lead us on to the next step to take it to the clinic. That's the sort of thing you're looking for, the daily inspiration. But there's also the disappointments, the false leads, the things you think you've got something and you go down that path. And then you spend weeks or months, sometimes years on something that is a fruitless endeavor. So I think you definitely have to have a certain resilience, a certain persistence, a certain sense of mission, of passion for that work to endure. And I think that's probably something worth communicating.
I was going to say that, Paul, when you think about finding those little nuggets to then take on and do more, for example, in the COVID world, right? So why did we have a vaccine developed so quickly? It wasn't the fact, it's not the technology of mRNA or anything else, but the secret was on some work done by Barney Graham and NIH, I think, where he discovered that the respiratory syncytial virus was not working in a vaccine, but what he found was when it was in a pre-fusion state, it had all the epitopes mapped out, but when it was budding out, in a post-fusion state, it was not working well. So when he found that out, then they locked the structure of the epitope or the piece of that good stuff on the virus in a certain way. It was very protective, like 14 times more protective. So this knowledge is what allowed everybody to make a vaccine using the locked conformation of pre-fusion state that while we had a significant amount of success in the vaccines. If not for that story or that initial work done in the 90s, we would not be so quickly having a vaccine today. So really these type of discovery science that we do, and then taking that and then allowing, and the more we learn about, like you said, our own cytokine, our own bodies working against us, now you can modulate that is what's going to be very helpful as we move forward in the future.
Clearly, the 3 of you have come a long way since the biology lab and classes in Lovedale. So thank you for sharing all that technical knowledge with us and talking about exciting things going forward. What can we expect in the horizon coming forward, looking ahead? I know you all are in the process of many discoveries. Which one should we be excited about?
Well, we have many products in the pipeline that we're working on, and some of them I can't talk about because it's not yet. And I know
Okay.
I'm working for a
understand.
publicly traded company, but essentially, when you think about any new emerging disease, we're probably on it and working on it. And so we are working on multiple ones, from viruses, bacteria, and parasites. Parasites are very difficult. Think about malaria, billions have been spent, still don't have a successful vaccine. I'm only talking about prevention space. But so there are lots of work going on in those kinds of areas, how you express the proteins, how you add things to that to make it more protective, like adjuvants and other things. So we're working on many, many different programs. As you know, I worked on a COVID vaccine, which we basically donated to all the zoos in the country around the world. And that's still continuing for us. But as you can imagine, we're looking to work on several other programs as well, but also looking for the next big deal, the next big thing that happens, mostly probably an RNA virus or maybe a vector-borne pathogen. And we keep our eyes and ears out for that and hopefully come up with an exciting solution.
Paul, Siddharth, either one of you want to tell us, or can you share with us what's coming up next?
Paul, you want to go?
Well, with regard to our primary focus on bone metastasis and prostate cancer, we've identified an interplay between two proteins on the surface of prostate cancer cells that act as homing beacons. They home to the signal that's coming from the bone marrow and lock into a niche over there, a safe harbor, which provides them survival signals. So we've designed an antibody that targets the interplay between these two integrins, called a bispecific integrin antibody. And that is currently in advanced testing, and we're finding ways in how to induce cell death in these cancer cells, as well as disable the enabling environment in the bone. So it's sort of a diverse strategy. And just to lock into what Siddharth had been talking about, we're also finding ways to spark a type of cell death that induces the immune response in these cancer cells. So we're taking a different multi-pronged approach to try to, with the goal of eliminating the capacity of prostate cancer to colonize the bone. And not just for prostate cancer alone, we're looking at this as an exemplar of other processes of non-random metastasis. How does this example, for instance, exemplify what other cancers use? There are real limitations. We talked about Next Horizon, real limitations about genomic sequencing of tumors to explain their biology. I think it has fallen far short of that, at least when viewed through the lens of how tumors metastasize to specific organs, so-called organ-specific metastases. So I think that's where, for me, the most exciting new horizon is. How do we define these novel mechanisms of metastases, and how do we transpose them into novel therapeutic strategies that we can harness in combinations? As oncologists, we love to combine therapies, such as with immune checkpoint inhibitors, this new class of immunotherapy that is sometimes dramatically effective, but only in a minority of cancers. So that's where I see the next horizon coming from, at least from my perspective.
Thanks, Paul. Siddharth, I'm sure there's some exciting things happening in your lab.
Yeah, so we've become very interested of late in aging. So the physiological process of aging, which is basically, why does our body begin to deteriorate physically as we age? And there's, believe it or not, there's no physical reason for why this should be the case. The atoms that make up a human body can last billions of years. So this is clearly something biological, and it's not a fait accompli. One emerging idea in the field is that a major driver of physiological aging, i.e. body deterioration, is that your own immune system turns against you over a period of time. And so this goes by the name of chronic low-grade inflammation. And there are strong links between such low-grade inflammation and a carbohydrate-heavy diet, for example. And simple ketogenic intervention or intermittent fasting. All of these are caloric restriction. All of these are strategies that have been shown not only to improve your overall health in the short term, but also to delay and even reverse the physiological side effects of aging. And these all impinge on their capacity, basically, to prevent this low-level autoimmune response that your body is mounting against its own tissues as they begin to loosen and weaken with time. And so this has become a real topic of interest to us because we study immune responses. And here we are learning a lot from our fellow mammals, the bats. So bats are fascinating creatures. And I don't know if a lot of people know this, but on average, bats live about 2.5 times more, pound for pound, than an equivalent mammal. You know, all other considerations taken into account. So that's remarkable. I mean, you've got bats that can live for 30 years. And if you look at an average bat, I mean, it's about 1/4 of the size of a cat or a chihuahua or something like that. And you don't have dogs and cats living for 30 years. And the equivalent here would be for a human being to live for 200 years. So that's amazing. And they are mammals, just like us. So what gives? The interesting thing here is that bats seem to be able to live this long because they've really dampened immune systems. So they don't have this sort of chronic low-grade inflammatory problem that plagues the rest of us mammals. And now the trade-off here is that bats are also such amazing reservoirs for viruses, like what Mahesh was talking about. And that's largely because they have this dampened immune response. But it's a trade-off. I mean, maybe you have a few bats, in a colony of 1 million that die off if there's some new virus that decides to get reactivated or something like that. But in general, at the population level, bats do really well because they have made this basic sort of deal with the devil, which is that it's okay, we'll harbor a lot of viruses and all other pathogens in exchange for this, extended lifespan that we're going to get in return. And so this is it's an incredible thing. So and so we study influenza pathogenesis, and we found this mode of lung injury that the virus triggers. Well, so guess what? Bats harbor a huge diversity of influenza strains, and this is something that, again, people may not know. Of course, certainly they have a bunch of coronaviruses, and maybe that's authentically where the COVID-19 pandemic started. In some way, can be traced back to the bat. But they also have a huge genetic diversity of influenza viruses, and these bat species are now largely restricted to Amazonia, to the New World. And quite remote from human contact. But I would suspect that it's only a matter of time before some of these come into, repeated and proximal contact with human populations. And it's very likely that the next influenza pandemic may actually emerge from bats and not so much from birds. So that's our reason for getting into studying how the bat immune system functions. And what we've found is that the cell death pathway that we're looking at that is active in human lungs and that triggers all of this illness in humans and in birds and so on is mutated in bats. There's a single amino acid in a key bat protein that is different in all bats from all non-bats. And so we have set up an experiment to see whether that mutation is what makes bats able to harbor such a large genetic diversity of influenza strains. And we've done this experiment by introducing that mutation into the mouse. So we've made a mouse that has a bat mutation in a key cell death protein. And then we've challenged this mouse with an otherwise lethal dose of influenza virus. And amazingly, the animal is able to survive that infection. And if you look in the lungs of these mice, the mice are fine, but if you look at their lungs, they're full of virus. So this tells us two things. One is that the virus is really not a driver of lethality. You can actually coexist with influenza. Imagine that. It's something that you can just live with. And secondly, that the primary driver of disease here is your own immune system. And bats have found a way around that. And so they can coexist with this huge diversity of viruses that they carry. So yeah, we're learning all these new things from studying these other model systems and model organisms. The overall idea here is to see if we can borrow from natural experiments, such as the one that I just described that's done in the bat, to reverse, certainly delay the physiological sequelae of aging, and improve the quality of life as we get into our 70s and our 80s and so on, because really there's no reason for us to have this physical decline with time. And so that's kind of where we're going.
You're making me feel a little hopeful and giving me a few hints of how to get old. But I think in trying to wrap up this session, I've heard you all say a lot of exciting things. You all are obviously very methodical, very curious-minded. What advice would you give for a young person trying to launch into your careers? And what should they be excited for in the future, knowing all that you all know from the past? Any one of you, please.
I think curiosity is one key thing when you're looking at getting into a career in science, right? So to me, as long as you want to know how things work, and you want to figure that out, I think it's a great place to go. And like some of us, we didn't really start out with this in mind, but certainly found a calling in how we were able to do that. Personally, I think where I am at, working for all these products for all the animals in the world is so rewarding for me. I see my dog every day and I feel like, man, I'm so happy that I'm working on these vaccines, treatments for my dog and helping save them. So I think as you guys look to and girls look to a career in science, I think it's important to see how much you can help yourself, the world, and how exciting it can be. Because it's not just simply about looking at the mechanisms, but also seeing the fruition of what you do. And I think in my situation, I'm in more an applied sense, working in trying to make products. I've been fortunate that I've been able to see many of these come to market, right? I know Paul and Siddharth are doing very early research, which forms a basis for what we can take on and quickly do the studies to get products to market. So I think when you're looking for a career in science, it's not just the early part, the mid part, or the late part. There's so many opportunities. There's so many different things you can study, and it does not have to be immunology, biology, but any aspect of science, where it's always interesting to find out, well, how does this thing work? So I think it's a wonderful place to be, and I wish all of you great success in your future careers.
Thanks, Mahesh. Siddharth, Paul, do you all have any advice for a young, energetic, science-minded person to come into your field?
Yeah, I would say, Kalpana, just to carry on from there, is that yes, I certainly believe curiosity and trying to understand how things work in the world is extremely valuable, And I think Lovedale sparks that in the sense that you have an environment and a breadth of education that allows you to think broadly, and you engage with the environment in which we live in, you interact with so many kids, you're very collaborative, enjoying the collaborative nature, whether you're participating in team sports or orchestra or stage productions and so forth. That's something you sort of gets inculcated with you at a young age. I think that's a great part of working in teams. I enjoy that a lot. I would also say, for me personally, what matters the most is problem solving. Finding a problem that you're interested in, that you want to solve. Not all science has to be through that lens, but for me, that's what works to spark my passion. And that's what drives essentially the ethos of my research.
Thank you very much, Paul. And Siddharth, what about you? I know you certainly have some thoughts on how the next generation of curious-minded people should approach your career.
Yeah, I do. So I'm more of a basic scientist than I'd say either Mahesh or Paul, because they're more embedded than I am in the commercial and medical spaces, respectively. Whereas as long as I can secure funding, can pretty much do any kind of science that I want, and I can pivot quite quickly. And the reason I'm saying this is because this kind of a profession, the kind of more sort of basic and pure science that I'm doing, is a real viable career option. And I would like the young minds out there to know that this is a possibility. It is not something that is just the domain of the super smart or anything like that. I mean, this is accessible to you as long as you are earnest and you are curious, and this is of interest to you. Unlike your other mainstream career choices, medicine, engineering, and so on, the roadmap for entering a career in science is not as well laid out. So my suggestion would be to certainly to reach out to any one of the three of us on this panel if you're looking to get more advice on this front. And so that's one thing that I'd like to say. And the second has to do with simply the nature of the educational system in India. It is exam driven, and so this in its very nature is something that stifles curiosity and really dampens creativity. Much of the science and the best moments that I remember from school were really the result of a few enlightened teachers who went off topic and basically went off syllabus and used the campus of Lawrence, for example. We have such a fantastic 750 acres at our disposal to show us what the world really was like. So one small example that I could bring up here was, I think it was Mrs. Enos who in prep school asked us to map out the entire railway line from Metropolitan to Ooty and label every single train station along the way. And we also took a little walk down the railroads, I think from Lovedale in the direction of Ooty, or maybe it was the other way. And then we had to go back and draw this sort of contour map, a topology-based map of the entire, train line. And I remember that like it happened yesterday. And I don't remember very much else, about triple integrals or anything else that I studied that was directly from the syllabus. And so the reason I bring this up as an example is that it might be a good idea for school to consider the possibility of some sort of extracurricular approach, because whether it was Mrs. Enos or Mr. Surendralal or Ms. Hensman, all of these people sparked creativity by not adhering to your standard syllabus. And so if there was a way in which we could maybe institutionalize an extracurricular program that encourages scientific thinking that is open-ended and not grade-driven, I think that would be a fantastic idea. And we do something along those lines here at Fox Chase. We have a program to encourage teens to think scientifically, and we bring them in for 3 to 6 months, and we use the Drosophila model for this. It's Drosophila as your humble fruit fly. And it's also a really well-established genetic model for molecular biology and so on. And so you will have these kids come in, they're high school kids, and they are introduced to the basic biology of Drosophila, its developmental stages and everything like that. And that takes about a week. And then they are asked to come up with their own projects. So, and these projects can fall into 2 categories. One is if you are interested in studying the development of Drosophila from egg all the way to the adult. And the second is if you're interested in studying the behavior of the adult, sleeping, feeding, and that sort of thing. And then you set up experiments. And it could be a question such as, maybe is the acidity in orange juice something that affects sleep patterns in the adult Drosophila? So there, what you would do is you would mix banana pulp, which is what the fruit fly typically likes to eat and what we feed them in the lab. You mix that with orange juice, or you feed banana pulp alone or orange juice alone, or various forms of orange juice, and then you make recordings of what happens to the fruit fly and you collect all of that. That would be your data. You would have a hypothesis in the beginning of all of this, and then you see if the data points actually fit that hypothesis. And this is something that has really taken off because it has sparked curiosity and creativity in these teens in a way that that has really pivoted them from thinking about science as something that was, at best a hobby or, some sort of oddball curiosity, and certainly not a career choice, to something that now is legitimately a career option, something that they would love to do. And some of our kids have deviated from, a traditional track of just doing medicine into now considering science as a career opportunity. So if there's interest along these lines from Lawrence to set up such an extracurricular program, I'm sure that all of us would be happy to help with it.
Thank you very much, Siddharth. I enjoyed all of your comments of what you think, because I personally also believe that collaboration, teamwork, curiosity, enjoyment in what you do is all very important to kind of picking a profession and a career, and it's for the long haul. So you need to be tenacious, and persistent, methodical. I think any profession requires all of that. So I thank you all for bringing all of those things up. But most importantly, I thank you all for being in conversation with us and coming on Oil Nation and informing us a little bit of what you do. So I'm extremely grateful to you for that. And with that, let me pass this along back to Rohan. So Rohan, please do take it away.
Thank you.
Hi there. So curiosity killed the cat, yet afforded it 9 lives. I
Right.
suppose that could be, an underlying theme to this session, right? Yeah, inviting curious folks to, chart their own course in life. And I really hope that we can engage with school on this topic, Siddharth and Paul and Mahesh, and perhaps, have a mini workshop so that folks and kids can get a flavor. And I can tell you one thing, Kalpana, we worked very hard over the last couple of months to put together a program for OL Nation at Lovedale. And we had, I think, 17 or 18 Old Lawrencians across the 70-year times, 64-year, actually, 1950 to 2014 time span, talking about a whole range of topics. I don't think the school expected it, or the parents and students expected us to be all there on time, and it was really well received. I mean, we had to, wedge ourselves into a whole range of programs, but the folks who came were really, really happy. And it also showed that OLs were willing to give and share their ideas. And, we've been around all over the world, we've traveled far, and we've come back, and we're there to give. So I feel, and I really believe, if we engage with school, especially, and this is direct education, I mean, in a different way, of course. Forward to, engaging with school along with you guys and creating value for our next generation. So thank you very much, everybody. Mahesh, Paul, Siddharth, and of course, Kalpana, for being here this evening. And with that, we tell our audience, thank you for joining us. Don't forget, take up the opportunity to call the guys for any help you need on the topic, Journeys in Science. Have a good evening, everybody. Goodbye.